The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across the pulpit where Pastor Daniel Harper stood. His voice was steady, his words gentle, each syllable soaked in conviction. To his congregation, he was the embodiment of grace, a husband devoted to his wife, a leader devoted to God. Yet behind the calm smile and well-pressed suit, something restless stirred. Every sermon, every prayer, every handshake after service was a performance perfected over years of habit. Daniel had learned to hide the cracks, the loneliness that gnawed at him when the church doors closed and the applause faded. At home, his wife Grace moved around him like a ghost of a life they once shared. Their conversations had become polite exchanges, their marriage a routine of appearances. As the choir's voices swelled, Daniel's gaze lingered a moment too long on the front row, a place where faces blurred, yet one pair of eyes seemed to hold his longer than the rest. He forced himself to look away, clearing his throat, pressing his palms together. He told himself it was nothing. A fleeting thought, a moment of human weakness, but deep down, Daniel knew the difference between sin and temptation, and he could already feel the line bending. When the service ended, the sunlight had shifted, falling across his face like judgment. Daniel smiled once more for his flock, the perfect shepherd, his secrets safely hidden beneath his robe. The next chapter would reveal the woman behind that gaze. Elena Moore's voice was the kind that could still a restless room. Soft but steady, it carried both devotion and ache, echoing through the dim sanctuary during late-night choir rehearsals. She sang with her eyes half-closed, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to admit, that Pastor Daniel Harper's gaze lingered on her longer than it should. Elena was 34, a schoolteacher by day, a fixture in the church by night. She'd joined the choir years ago after her divorce, seeking peace in hymns where love had once failed her. Daniel had been her spiritual anchor, his sermons a balm to her wounded faith. But lately, the way he spoke her name, the subtle warmth in his tone, unsettled something deep within her. After practice one evening, as candles flickered low, Daniel approached her. "Beautiful as always," he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "Your voice. It carries truth." Elena smiled, uncertain whether to thank him or flee. "It's just the song, Pastor. Not me." But his eyes said otherwise. The air between them shifted, thick with unspoken understanding, dangerous in its quietness. When she gathered her sheet music, their fingers brushed briefly, the contact burning longer than either expected. Outside, the night wind howled against the church doors. Inside, silence pulsed with what neither could yet name. Elena glanced back once before leaving. Daniel still stood by the pulpit, his expression unreadable, the flickering light catching on the gold band around his finger. The first boundary had been crossed. The next would come easier. It began with prayer. That was how they justified it. Elena would stay behind after evening choir, claiming she needed counsel. Daniel, ever the devoted shepherd, would listen. At first, their words were wrapped in scripture, comfort, forgiveness, and grace. But soon the silences between verses grew longer, heavier, more charged than holy intent. The sanctuary was nearly always empty by then, the light from the stained glass cross fading into deep hues of violet and blue. Daniel sat across from her, Bible open but unread, his thumb tracing the thin pages as if searching for permission. Elena's eyes glistened under the dim light, her voice trembling. "I pray for strength," she whispered, "but it feels like I'm losing it." His hand covered hers. "Maybe this connection is something God means for us to understand." Their breaths mingled, guilt colliding with desire. The first kiss was hesitant, born from tears, not passion, but when it happened, the air itself seemed to stop. The church, once sacred, became the witness to their undoing. Nights followed with stolen hours behind locked doors, each encounter blurring repentance and need. Daniel's sermons grew more fervent, his words about temptation oddly personal. Elena, once radiant in song, now sang with a sorrow that felt like confession. Whispers began, faint, curious murmurs among parishioners. But neither of them cared to listen. Under the cross that once demanded purity, they had found something darker, binding, and impossible to let go. And yet secrets whispered in sanctuaries rarely stay unheard for long. Daniel sat at the dinner table, fork untouched, the clinking of cutlery echoing louder than his wife's voice. Grace spoke softly about their son's school play, about the church's upcoming fundraiser, but her words barely reached him. His eyes were fixed on the small wooden cross hanging above the dining room doorway. Its presence felt heavier now, almost accusatory. "Long day?" she asked, her tone tender but uncertain. He nodded. "Just counseling sessions. People need a lot of guidance lately." Grace smiled faintly, mistaking distance for devotion. "You give so much of yourself, Daniel. Just don't lose what's left for us." He kissed her forehead, the gesture hollow, before excusing himself. Upstairs, his phone buzzed. Elena's message glowed against the darkness. "I miss you." "Are you thinking of me?" He hesitated only a moment before typing back. "Always." At church, Elena's patience began to fray. She wanted more than whispers and shadows. During choir practice, her gaze lingered, daring him to meet it. "You said you'd talk to her," she whispered one night in the parking lot. "I can't. Not yet," he murmured, guilt pressing like a weight on his chest. As he drove home, the rain beat against the windshield like a drum of judgment. Grace was waiting in the doorway when he arrived, her eyes searching his face for answers he couldn't give. In the living room, the cross shimmered in faint lamplight, silent, unwavering, watching as Daniel's sanctified life began to splinter beyond repair. Elena's hands trembled as she adjusted her phone beneath her jacket, the faint red light blinking like a heartbeat. She told herself it was only precaution, something to hold on to in case Daniel changed, in case his promises dissolved into sermons about sin. But beneath that lie she knew it was fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being erased. Their meetings had grown tense. What once felt sacred now carried an edge of desperation. "You've been distant," she said one night as they sat in the church's counseling room, curtains drawn. Daniel avoided her eyes. "I'm trying to keep us safe. People notice things. Safe for you," she snapped. "I'm the one left with whispers and guilt." Her phone recorded every syllable, his sighs, her quivering voice, the sound of hands brushing across the table. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing. "If anyone ever found out—" "They won't," Elena interrupted, voice softening. "Not if you stay with me." Later, alone in her apartment, she replayed fragments of their moments, his words of affection, his reassurances. The audio filled the silence like a ghost of what they'd destroyed. Daniel, meanwhile, couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. During his next sermon, as he looked over the congregation, his gaze snagged on Elena. She smiled faintly, almost triumphantly, and for the first time, he felt trapped, not by temptation, but by her possession of his truth. Outside, thunder rolled through the sky. Neither of them knew it yet, but the small, blinking light beneath a jacket had already sealed both their fates. The first letter arrived, folded neatly inside the offering box. No name, just words inked in a trembling hand. A shepherd should not feed from poisoned pastures. Daniel read it 3 times before burning it in his office trash can. But the scent of smoke clung to him long after. By Sunday, whispers threaded through the congregation. Conversation stilled when he passed. The choir avoided his gaze. Even the sanctuary, once his refuge, felt foreign. Every hymn now carried accusation instead of praise. Grace noticed the change. One evening, as he sat in silence over a cold dinner, she said softly, "Daniel, is there something you need to tell me?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched him with quiet dread. He forced a weary smile. "Just exhaustion. Too many sermons. Too many souls to carry." She nodded, though the tension lingered like incense after prayer. At the next service, Daniel stumbled over his sermon. His hands shook, voice cracking mid-verse. From the pulpit, he caught sight of a torn photo pinned to the bulletin board, his face ripped down the center. Someone had written "false prophet" across it. After the congregation dispersed, Daniel lingered by the baptismal font. His reflection shimmered in the holy water, distorted and fractured. He dipped his hand in, as though cleansing could still erase the sin crawling beneath his skin. Outside, Elena watched from the shadow of the bell tower, her phone still recording. The storm around them was no longer rumor. It was revelation in motion. Rain battered against Elena's apartment window, each drop a relentless reminder of time running out. Her phone buzzed on the table, Daniel's name flashing again and again, but she let it ring. Around her, the air was thick with candle smoke and resentment. The recording sat neatly in a folder on her laptop, labeled "For Protection." When Daniel finally arrived, soaked and trembling, the tension between them was almost tangible. He closed the door slowly, his eyes darting toward the computer. "Elena, we can't talk like this anymore," he began, voice cracking. "You're scaring me." She laughed, soft at first, then sharp. "Scaring you? You've been lying to me for months." To her, to God. Daniel stepped closer, his composure slipping. "You don't understand. If this gets out, I lose everything. Grace, the church, my calling." "Then make a choice," Elena said, her tone trembling between love and vengeance. "Leave her, be honest, or I tell the world what kind of man their pastor really is." The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, thunder rolled through the sky like judgment itself. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides, nails biting into his palms. He wanted to pray, to beg, but words failed. As he left, Elena's voice followed him down the hallway, quiet, deliberate, final. "You have until Sunday." Daniel didn't look back. The church bell tolled in the distance, its echo bleeding into the storm. Inside him, something sacred fractured, faith replaced by fear, devotion twisted into desperation. The church was empty, its corridors echoing with the hollow sound of Daniel's footsteps. Rain drummed against the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the floor. He moved toward the storage room, the place where they had once met in secrecy, now chosen for reckoning. Elena stood waiting, arms crossed, eyes red from sleeplessness. "You didn't call," she said softly, voice trembling with restrained fury. Daniel closed the door behind him, the click sharp in the silence. "We can't keep doing this," he muttered. "You're destroying everything I've built." She took a step closer, defiant. "I'm destroying it. You made me promises, Daniel. You said God would forgive us, that love makes things pure." "Love?" he snapped. "You call this love? Threats, recordings, blackmail?" Elena's expression hardened. "I did what I had to do." "You were never going to leave her. You wanted both lives, didn't you?" His pulse quickened. "Turn it off." "What?" "The phone. You're recording again." For a moment, neither moved. Then his hand shot out, snatching the small device from the table. The red light blinked like a heartbeat. He stared at it, then at her, his chest heaving. "Daniel, please," she began, reaching forward, but the dam had broken. Rage, shame, and panic collided in a single motion. The struggle was brief and brutal. A thud, a gasp, the clatter of the phone against concrete. When silence returned, only the bulb flickered, casting wild shadows across the overturned chair. Daniel stepped back, shaking, realization dawning like a curse. The recording light still blinked. The storage room was silent except for the faint hum of rain against the roof. Daniel stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes locked on Elena's still form, sprawled across the cold stone floor. The red light on the phone had gone dark, but its memory lingered, blinking behind his eyelids like a wound that refused to close. He dropped to his knees beside her. "No, no, no." The words came out as breath, not sound. He touched her cheek, already cooling, and felt something break inside him, something he could never reclaim. The flickering bulb overhead cast shifting halos of gold across the scene. The fallen Bible, the cross pendant tangled in her hair, the blood spreading like spilled ink. He pressed his palms together, trembling. "Father, forgive me," he whispered. "I was weak. She tempted me. I didn't mean—" His voice cracked, swallowed by the silence. He reached for the candle on the nearby shelf, setting it upright beside her. Its flame danced, steady yet cruel, illuminating the grotesque stillness. He prayed louder now, scripture tumbling from his mouth, disjointed and frantic. "Wash me, O Lord. Cleanse me from this iniquity." But the words rang hollow. No light pierced the darkness that had taken root in him. When the prayer ended, Daniel rose slowly, staring down at the body as though expecting it to rise. Instead, the candle flickered once, then died, leaving him alone in suffocating dark. Outside, the church bell tolled midnight. Daniel dragged the heavy tarp across the churchyard, every rustle of plastic sounding like thunder in the night. The moon hung low, veiled by clouds, its pale light cutting through the fog just enough to show the dirt on his trembling hands. He dug quickly, shallow and desperate, his breath clouding in the cold air. Each strike of the shovel echoed like a confession he couldn't take back. When it was done, he buried the phone beneath the roots of an old oak tree, the same place he'd once prayed for strength. Now it felt like hallowed ground turned grave. Inside, he scrubbed the floor until his knuckles bled, erasing every trace of what he'd done. The scent of cleaning chemicals clung to the air, heavy and sterile. On the pulpit, his Bible lay open, pages smudged by fingerprints and guilt. He stared at the verse beneath his shaking hand. Be sure your sin will find you out. The next Sunday, his sermon trembled with false zeal. His voice rose and cracked as he thundered about purity, faith, and temptation. Congregants nodded, unaware that every word was a self-indictment disguised as devotion. Grace watched from the front pew, her eyes narrowing. He looked different. Sweat at his temple, a flicker of panic behind his practiced calm. That night, when she reached for his hand in bed, he flinched. Are you all right, Daniel? She whispered. He forced a smile in the dark. Just tired, my love. But outside, the wind stirred the churchyard, scattering loose soil over what he thought he'd buried forever. It began with a knock at dawn. 2 officers stood on the doorstep, stoic, wordless, eyes heavy with what they carried. Grace opened the door, confusion turning to dread as she saw the warrant in their hands. Behind them, red and blue lights flickered across the stained glass windows of the parsonage, painting the walls in chaotic color. Inside the church office, detectives unearthed what Daniel thought was erased forever. The hidden cloud backups, every voice memo, every whispered confession, had been automatically saved. Elena's trembling words filled the room like a ghost's final testimony. He said he'd choose me. He said God would forgive us. Daniel sat motionless as they played the recordings, his collar still around his neck, the symbol of grace now a noose of guilt. His voice echoed from the small device on the table, gentle, intimate, unmistakably his. Outside, the congregation gathered in disbelief. Parishioners whispered, some praying, others turning away. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing against the steeple like lightning strikes. The church that once preached salvation now stood as a stage for ruin. Grace stood in the doorway, her eyes hollow, watching her husband being led away in handcuffs. She remembered the first sermon she ever heard him give, about redemption and truth. Now, those words cut through her like glass. Daniel, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. What have you done? He turned once, expression vacant, lips moving in silent prayer. As the police car pulled away, rain began to fall, soft at first, then relentless, washing down the church steps as if trying to cleanse what could never be purified again. The courthouse was silent except for the rhythmic scrape of rain against tall windows. Rows of former parishioners sat with bowed heads, hands clasped, as if attending one last sermon they never wished to hear. Daniel Harper, once their shepherd, now stood before the judge, a man stripped of collar and conviction alike. His defense was less an argument and more a confession veiled in faith. When he took the stand, he didn't plead for mercy. He spoke as though addressing a congregation. Temptation is not the devil's trick, he said, voice trembling. It's God's test. I failed mine. I loved her as a man when I should have led her as a pastor. And when she sought to reveal my sin, I mistook exposure for damnation. Gasps rippled through the room. Grace, seated behind him, wept quietly, her wedding band turned backward. The prosecutor's cross-examination was clinical, dismantling every fragment of Daniel's justification. Evidence of recordings, deceit, and violence left no space for sermons or salvation. The gavel struck, final, echoing like a death knell. Life imprisonment, no parole. The judge's words faded beneath the low hum of whispered prayers and shuffling feet. In prison, Daniel kept to himself, spending long hours in the chapel's small corner. He no longer preached. He only stared at the cracked wall before him, where years of moisture had etched a faint shape resembling a cross. Each day, light filtered through the bars, striking that crack as if mocking his once holy life. He whispered prayers, not for forgiveness, but for understanding, though none ever came. Final line. He preached salvation to others, but his own soul was the one he never tried to save.